Snow fell thick enough to turn the world into a white tomb.
My authority comes from high
Outside
command.
the dugout
These
entrance,
supplies are critical.
daylight had
We're moving
faded to
through.
a pale gray
Reconnaissance
smear
confirms
barely
enemy
visible
movement
through
in
the
this
curtain
sector.
of ice.
We bypass the ridge
Cold
and
air
proceed
seeped
with the
through every
infiltration plan
crack
as
in the
marked.
frozen earth, carrying with it the stench of mildew and gunpowder. In the cramped tunnel, soldiers held their breath, listening to each footfall above. Every step could be the last sound they'd ever hear. Among them, a young woman sat pressed against the dirt wall, hands trembling slightly from the cold, or from the suspicious stares boring into her from all sides. No one believed she belonged here, and none of them suspected that in just a few minutes, one seemingly insane decision would save them all. The winter front was merciless. Lieutenant Benjamin Hayes had survived 3 tours, 2 shrapnel wounds, and the complete decimation of his original unit. He'd seen men die in every conceivable way, but this pinned underground while enemy forces controlled every inch of ground above this was new territory even for him. The tunnel system was a relic from an earlier conflict, half collapsed and never meant to shelter this many bodies. Water dripped from the earthen ceiling. Wooden support beams creaked under the weight of frozen soil. Every few minutes the ground would tremble as artillery rounds landed somewhere in the distance, sending cascades of dirt onto their heads. Hayes counted heads in the dim lamplight. 11 soldiers, down from 18 when they'd started the reconnaissance mission 48 hours ago. Private Marcus Webb sat closest to him, field dressing a wound on his leg. Sergeant Rachel Moreno checked ammunition counts with shaking hands. Corporal David Chen stared at nothing, shock written across his face. The rest huddled in small groups, sharing body heat, speaking in whispers that barely rose above the drip of water. They'd been sent to scout enemy positions along the northern ridge. Simple intelligence gathering. Get in, observe, get out. But the weather had turned faster than meteorology predicted, and enemy patrols had quadrupled overnight. Now they were trapped in a tunnel network that offered only 2 exits, both likely watched. Hayes studied the radio equipment spread on a tarp, smashed during their retreat into the tunnels. No communication, no extraction. No one even knew they were still alive. The lamp flickered. Someone cursed softly. Outside, boots crunched through snow. The soldiers froze. Hayes raised his hand, signaling silence. The footsteps passed overhead, moving west. After 30 seconds, breathing resumed. "We can't stay here," Webb whispered. "We can't leave either," Moreno countered. "They've got thermal optics. The moment we surface, then we wait for dark. Dark's in 6 hours. We've got maybe 90 rounds left between all of us." Hayes listened to them argue, but his mind was elsewhere. He was calculating distances, angles, sight lines. There was a ridge approximately 400 meters northeast of their position. If someone could reach it, they'd have a clear view of enemy movements, could potentially create enough chaos to give the team a window for escape. But reaching that ridge meant crossing open ground, and holding it meant precision shooting in conditions that would challenge even his best marksman. His gaze drifted to the far corner of the tunnel where she sat. Her name was Claire Donovan, and she looked even younger than her 22 years. She'd appeared at the forward operating base 3 weeks ago with transfer papers that seemed legitimate but raised questions no one could quite articulate. Her uniform was correct, her ID checked out, but something about her didn't fit the pattern. She was too quiet, too observant. She moved through the base like someone trying not to be noticed, which only made everyone notice her more. When Hayes had reviewed the roster for this mission, her name had been added at the last minute. He'd gone to the base commander to protest, but the orders came from higher up. Claire Donovan was assigned to his team. End of discussion. Now she sat in the tunnel, knees drawn to her chest, watching the lamp flame dance. She hadn't spoken more than 10 words since they'd gone underground, hadn't complained about the cold or the danger, just watched, listened. "Still think bringing her was a good idea?" Webb muttered to Hayes. Several other soldiers glanced toward Claire. Their expressions ranged from resentment to outright hostility. Sergeant Moreno had been the most vocal. She's a liability, sir. No combat experience, no field training we can verify. She's taking up space and rations we can't spare. Hayes had heard variations of this argument a dozen times in the past 2 days. He'd also noticed that Claire had never asked for more than her share, had never slowed them down during the retreat, had carried her own pack without complaint through 3 miles of frozen terrain. But none of that mattered to the others. All they saw was someone different, someone unproven, someone who might get them killed. Private First Class Jonathan Reeves was less diplomatic than Moreno. Command screwed us. We're down here dying because they added dead weight to the team. That's enough, Hayes said quietly. Is it? Look at her. She's terrified. She's going to panic when... I said that's enough, Reeves. The soldier fell silent, but his anger radiated in the cold air. Claire hadn't reacted to any of it. She sat perfectly still, her breathing even, her eyes distant. Hayes wondered what she was thinking, wondered why she'd volunteered for this assignment, wondered what was in those classified files that came with her transfer papers. Chen spoke up from across the tunnel. Maybe we should have left her at the last checkpoint. We don't leave people behind, Hayes said flatly, even when they'll get us killed. Hayes didn't answer, because the truth was he didn't know if bringing her had been the right call. All he knew was that abandoning someone wasn't in his playbook. The lamp sputtered. Its fuel was running low. Outside, the snow kept falling. Benjamin Hayes had learned leadership in the worst possible classroom, watching good commanders die and bad ones get soldiers killed. His first CO had been a textbook officer, following procedure even when procedure meant walking into an ambush. 6 men died because of that rigidity. His second CO had been too flexible, too willing to improvise without thinking through consequences. The entire unit nearly got wiped out before he was relieved. Hayes had absorbed both lessons. He'd learned when to follow the book and when to throw it away. More importantly, he'd learned to recognize when conventional wisdom wouldn't save you. This was one of those moments. He'd been mentally running through scenarios for the past hour. Every option ended badly. They could try to fight their way out suicide with their ammunition situation. They could wait for Rescueno. One knew they were here. They could surrender. The enemy had demonstrated their policy toward prisoners. The only viable option was creating a diversion, something significant enough to pull enemy forces away from their escape route. But that required a sharpshooter positioned at an elevated position, and it required them to get there first. He had exactly 1 rifle left with adequate range for the job. A military-grade bolt action with a powerful scope, capable of accurate fire at 600 meters or more. The problem was the rifle itself. Hayes examined it again, though he'd already done so 3 times. The barrel was slightly bent from when Webb had used it to pry open a jammed door. The scope's mounting bracket was cracked, making the sight unreliable. The bolt action still worked, but the whole weapon was compromised. That thing's scrap, Moreno said, watching him. Even if it fires, you can't trust the shot placement. I know. So what's the play, Lieutenant? Hayes didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about his remaining soldiers. Webb was the best marksman, but his leg wound would slow him down and affect his stability. Moreno had the nerves for it, but lacked the training for long-range work. Chen was too traumatized. Reeves was too angry. The rest of the team was either too injured or too inexperienced for what he needed. His eyes found Claire again. She was looking back at him now, not with fear or hope, just steady attention. Donovan, Hayes said quietly, come here. The tunnel went silent. Every soldier turned to stare. Claire stood and crossed the space between them, her movements careful in the cramped quarters. She stopped in front of Hayes, waiting. You ever fire a rifle? He asked. Yes, sir. Combat conditions? No, sir. Moreno stepped closer. Lieutenant, you can't be serious. Hayes ignored her. You ever shoot at distance, 300 meters or more? Claire hesitated. I can shoot. That's not what I asked. I understand, sir. The evasion was deliberate. Hayes recognized it because he'd heard it before from people with classified backgrounds. people who couldn't discuss their training in detail. "Listen carefully," Hayes said. "I need someone to reach that northeast ridge. Set up at the old observation post. Start taking shots at enemy positions. You won't need to hit every target, just enough to make them think we're mounting an assault from that direction." "You're going to send her?" Reeves cut in. "She'll never make it. She'll die up there, or she'll give away our position trying." "I'll make it," Claire said. Her voice was quiet but certain. Hayes studied her face. There was something there, something beneath the surface that he couldn't quite read. But he'd learned to trust his instincts about people, and his instincts said she was more capable than she appeared. The question was whether he was willing to bet all their lives on that instinct. Hayes held the rifle in both hands, feeling its weight, its imbalance. A tool that had been reliable was now compromised. Using it would require compensating for factors that couldn't be precisely calculated. "Show me," he said to Webb. The private took the rifle and aimed at the far wall of the tunnel. Even in the dim light, the problem was visible. The slightest movement caused the scope to shift on its damaged mount. "The barrel bend is maybe 2 degrees, Webb explained. "At 100 meters, your shot's going to pull right by about 3 inches. At 300 meters, maybe 10 to 12 inches, and that's if the scope doesn't shift during recoil." "Could you make it work?" Hayes asked. Webb considered. "Maybe, if I had time to fire test rounds, calculate the deviation, memorize the compensation. But we don't have ammunition to waste, and I can't climb with this leg." "What about Moreno?" The sergeant shook her head. "I'm a decent shot at close range. This requires someone who can read wind, calculate drop, adjust for equipment malfunctional while under fire. That's specialist work, sir." Hayes knew she was right. What he was planning required someone with extensive long-range training, someone who could shoot not just accurately but intuitively, someone who could make a broken tool work through sheer skill. He turned to Claire. "Can you do it?" She reached for the rifle. Hayes handed it to her. The change was subtle but immediate. The way she gripped the stock, the way she brought the weapon to her shoulder, the way her body shifted into a stance that was practiced, automatic. She sighted down the barrel, her breathing steady, checked the bolt action, examined the scope mount with her fingertips, assessing the damage. "The scope's unusable," she said. "I'd need iron sights." "The rifle doesn't have backup irons," Webb pointed out. "I know." She lowered the weapon. "I can still shoot it." "Without sights?" Reeves laughed harshly. "You're going to eyeball targets at 300 meters? That's impossible." Claire looked at Hayes. "Do you want me to explain how, or would you rather I just do it when the time comes?" There was no arrogance in her voice, just a simple question. Hayes made his decision. "You'll leave in 1 hour, before dusk. The snow will give you some cover. Make it to the ridge, set up at the observation post, and start firing when you see our team moving south." "Understood, sir." "This is insane," Moreno said. "Lieutenant, with all respect, this is suicide. You're sending an unproven asset with a broken rifle to—" "I'm aware of what I'm doing, Sergeant." "Are you? Because I'm not sure." "That's enough." Hayes's voice carried command weight. "We're out of options. This is the play." He handed Claire 3 magazines, 30 rounds total. Probably not enough, but it was all they could spare. "Make each shot count," he said. She took the ammunition without comment. The tunnel had gone completely quiet. Every soldier was watching this exchange with expressions ranging from disbelief to anger. Hayes could feel their judgment, could feel the weight of this decision pressing down on him. If he was wrong, Claire would die. And then they all would, because there was no backup plan. If he was right, he pushed the thought away. Uncertainty was poison in command. "Get ready to move," he told his team. "As soon as we hear shots from the ridge, we go." They began preparing with mechanical efficiency, but Hayes could see the doubt in their movements. They didn't believe this would work. They thought he'd just sentenced a young woman to death for nothing. Maybe they were right. Claire sat down again, the rifle across her knees, and closed her eyes. Resting or praying, Hayes couldn't tell. He found himself hoping she had skills she hadn't revealed, because if she didn't, he'd just made the worst call of his career. The hour passed slowly. Soldiers checked their gear with quiet precision. Webb reloaded magazines, wincing each time his wounded leg shifted. Moreno distributed the last of their rations energy bars that tasted like cardboard but provided calories they'd need for the push ahead. Chen cleaned his rifle with shaking hands, the repetitive motion seeming to calm him. Claire sat motionless in the corner, the broken rifle still resting across her knees. Her eyes remained closed. Her breathing was so steady that for a moment, Hayes thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she spoke without opening her eyes. "You're all wondering if I'll panic." The statement hung in the cold air. "I won't," she continued quietly. "I've done this before." Reeves snorted. "Done what? Gotten people killed with a useless rifle?" Claire's eyes opened. She looked directly at him. "Survived when everyone thought I couldn't." There was something in her tone, not defensiveness, not anger, just a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. Hayes found himself reassessing her. The quiet demeanor wasn't fear, it was control, the kind of control that came from experience, not innocence. "Time," Moreno said, checking her watch. Claire stood. She slung the rifle over her shoulder and checked the magazines one more time. Her movements were economical, professional. Hayes moved to the tunnel entrance. The snow had lightened slightly, but visibility was still limited to maybe 50 meters. That would help her. The failing light would help more. "The observation post is 400 meters northeast," he said. "There's a depression about halfway there, dried creek bed. Use it for cover if you get pinned down." "I won't get pinned down," Claire said. "If you do, don't try to be a hero. Break contact and return here." She nodded. Hayes wanted to say something else, some command wisdom that would make this decision feel less like gambling with someone's life. But there were no words that fit. "Good luck," he said finally. Claire looked at each member of the team in turn. Her gaze lingered on Reeves, who glared back at her with open hostility. "I'll see you on the other side," she told them all. Then she slipped out into the snow. Claire Donovan had learned to shoot when she was 8 years old. Not at a range, not for sport. She'd learned in the rubble of what used to be her hometown, from a man who'd been a championship shooter before the war came to their region. His name had been Marcus. He was her neighbor. He'd survived 3 years of occupation by being useful, repairing weapons, training local militia. When government forces finally pushed the enemy back, Marcus stayed behind to help civilians who'd been trapped. Claire had been one of those civilians. Her parents had died in the first month of fighting. She'd survived by being small, quiet, and invisible, by learning which buildings were safe to hide in, by memorizing patrol patterns, by understanding that mistakes meant death. Marcus found her scavenging in a destroyed market. She was so malnourished, she could barely stand. He brought her to the shelter he'd set up in a basement, fed her, gave her a place to sleep. Then he'd handed her a rifle. "If you want to survive," he'd said, "you need to know how to protect yourself." The weapon was almost as tall as she was. Ancient bolt-action design, wood stock worn smooth by decades of use. The scope had been damaged in combat, cracked lens, loose mounting. "This is all I have," Marcus explained. "So you'll learn to shoot without relying on optics. You'll learn to read distance by eye, to judge wind by feel, to compensate for weapon flaws by understanding trajectory." She learned. For 3 years, while government forces slowly reclaimed territory, while peace agreements were negotiated and broken and renegotiated, she learned. Marcus taught her everything from basic marksmanship to advanced ballistics, how to control breathing, how to read landscape, how to make impossible shots when equipment failed. He taught her because he knew knowledge was the only inheritance he could give her. When the war finally ended, Marcus disappeared. She never found out what happened to him, but she carried his lessons like invisible armor. She'd joined the military at 18, using forged documents that aged her 2 years. She'd excelled in basic training but deliberately held back during marksmanship evaluations. She'd learned early that being too good made you stand out. And standing out meant questions about your past. Questions she couldn't answer without revealing things that needed to stay buried. So she'd been average, competent but not exceptional, useful but not remarkable, until someone in intelligence noticed inconsistencies in her file, until she'd been pulled into a room and asked very specific questions about her background, until they'd offered her a choice wash out of the service or accept a very particular kind of assignment. She'd accepted. The past 3 weeks had been assessment. They wanted to know if she could function in a real unit, if she could handle pressure, if the skills she claimed to have were genuine. Now, moving through snow toward a ridge that might be her grave, Claire understood this was the real test. The people in that tunnel didn't trust her, didn't believe in her honor. They saw a young woman who didn't fit their model of what a soldier should be. Marcus had taught her to expect that. People will underestimate you, he'd said. Use it. Let them think you're weak. Let them think you're afraid. Then, when it matters, show them what you really are. Claire reached the creek bed and dropped into it. The depression gave her cover in a direct line toward the ridge. She crawled forward, the broken rifle cradled in her arms, snow soaking through her uniform. Behind her, men who'd dismissed her as a liability were preparing to bet their lives on her competence. Ahead, enemy soldiers controlled the high ground, and in her hands, a weapon that shouldn't work waited to prove everyone wrong. Claire reached the observation post with 15 minutes to spare before Hayes's team would start their move. The position was exactly as described, a partially collapsed concrete structure, probably built as a communications relay decades ago. 2 walls still stood, providing some cover. The roof was gone. Snow had drifted into the interior, but there was a clear line of sight to the valley below. She brushed snow from a section of floor and lay prone, settling the rifle against her shoulder. From this angle, she could see enemy positions scattered across the landscape. A checkpoint at the crossroads. 2 patrol units moving between structures. What looked like a command post in a reinforced building. Target-rich environment. She checked her watch. 12 minutes. The rifle felt wrong in her hands, the bent barrel throwing off the balance, the missing scope leaving only instinct and experience. But wrong didn't mean useless. Marcus had taught her to see weapons as extensions of intention, not perfect machines. Every rifle has a personality, he'd said. Learn to listen to it. Understand its flaws. Work with them, not against them. Claire closed her eyes and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slowing her heart rate, centering herself. She opened her eyes and studied the wind. The snow was falling at a slight angle northwest to southeast. Light breeze, maybe 5 miles per hour. At 300 meters, that would push around maybe 4 inches left. Combine that with the barrel bend pulling right, and she'd need to aim left high to compensate, assuming the rifle behaved predictably, assuming the bent barrel created consistent deviation, assuming a lot of things that couldn't be tested. Movement below caught her attention. An enemy patrol was changing positions. 3 soldiers moving from the checkpoint toward a building that would give them a clear view of Hayes's intended escape route. If that patrol reached that building, the tunnel team would walk directly into their field of fire. 8 minutes until Hayes started his move. Claire made her decision. She'd have to fire early, alert the enemy to her presence before the team was in position. But if she didn't take this shot, the mission failed before it started. She settled her breathing, calculated distance 340 meters, factored in wind, trajectory, the bent barrel's pull, aimed left high just as Marcus had taught her. Her finger found the trigger. The metal was cold, even through her glove. She thought about the men in the tunnel, about their doubt, about Reeves's anger and Moreno's dismissal and Webb's resigned skepticism. She thought about Marcus, who'd handed a broken rifle to a starving child and said, "Learn to make this work." She thought about every moment of the past 14 years that had led to this instant. Then she stopped thinking at all. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The report echoed across the valley, sharp and definite. 340 meters away, the lead soldier in the enemy patrol dropped. Claire worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, adjusted her aim, fired again. The second soldier fell. The third dove for cover, shouting into a radio. Below, chaos erupted. Sirens wailed, soldiers scrambled for positions, orders were screamed across multiple frequencies. And from the valley floor, Claire heard the distinctive sound of Hayes's team beginning their push south. No turning back now. The tunnel team moved fast. Hayes led them out in a tight formation, Moreno covering their rear, Webb limping but keeping pace. They'd heard the shots from the ridge earlier than expected, but that didn't matter now. The operation was live. Through the snow, Hayes could hear confusion in the enemy response, shouting, vehicles starting, someone screaming coordinates into a radio. "She's pulling them northeast," Moreno said, her voice carrying a note of surprise. They crossed the first open area without contact. The attention was exactly where Claire had drawn it, toward the ridge, away from their route. Another shot rang out, then another. "She's still engaging," Chen said. "How long can she hold?" Hayes didn't answer because he didn't know. The plan had been for Claire to fire enough shots to create a distraction, then break contact and extract independently. But she was still shooting, still keeping enemy forces focused away from the team. She was giving them every second she could. They reached the southern checkpoint, abandoned. The soldiers who should have been guarding it had moved to respond to the threat on the ridge. "Clear," Webb confirmed. More shots echoed from the northeast. They were coming in rapid succession now. Claire was engaging multiple targets, forcing the enemy to take her seriously as a genuine assault. Hayes's respect for her tactical sense increased with each shot. She wasn't just firing randomly, she was pacing her engagement to sound like a coordinated attack, making a single broken rifle and 30 rounds feel like a full squad. They pushed through the checkpoint and into the relative cover of a forest tree line. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were growing, but still focused northeast. "We've got a window," Moreno said, "maybe 20 minutes before they realize the main force isn't on that ridge." "Then we use every second," Hayes replied. The team moved deeper into the trees. Behind them, gunfire continued. Claire was still up there, still drawing fire, still buying them time they desperately needed. Reeves looked back toward the sound of battle. His expression was complicated shame, maybe, mixed with something else. "She's going to die up there," he said quietly. "She knew the risks," Hayes replied, but privately, he found himself hoping she had an extraction plan, hoping the same instincts that had helped her shoot so effectively would help her survive what came next. The team disappeared into the trees. Behind them, on a ridge overlooking an empty valley, a young woman with a broken rifle continued doing the impossible. Claire fired her 28th round and knew she was out of time. Enemy forces had finally organized a coordinated response. She could see them moving 2 squads approaching her position from different angles, using cover effectively, closing the net. She'd given Hayes 40 minutes, more than enough for his team to clear the danger zone. Time to go. She collected the spent casings force of habit from Marcus's training and low-crawled out the back of the observation post. The ridge's rear slope was steep but navigable. She slid down it, using the snow to control her descent. Voices shouted above her. They'd reached the observation post, found it empty. Claire hit the bottom of the slope and ran. The forest here was dense, offering cover but also slowing movement. She could hear pursuit behind her soldiers crashing through underbrush, calling coordinates to each other. She ran for 10 minutes, then stopped to listen. The pursuit had spread out, lost her trail in the confusing terrain. She adjusted her direction and kept moving. It took her 3 hours to reach the extraction point Hayes had marked on her Mappa secondary rally point, 5 miles south of the original tunnel position. She'd half expected it to be empty, for the team to have left without her. But they were there, all of them, waiting. Hayes saw her first. Relief crossed his face before professional control reasserted itself. "Donovan," he said simply. Claire approached the group. They stared at her snow-covered, exhausted, but alive. Webb spoke first. "I counted at least 15 shots in those conditions. With that rifle." He shook his head slowly. "That's not possible." "And yet," Claire said quietly. Moreno stepped forward. Her expression was complicated embarrassment mixed with respect. "I was wrong about you. I'm sorry." "No apology necessary, Sergeant. You didn't know." "Should have given you the benefit of the doubt." Claire shrugged. "Doubt keeps people alive. Trust gets earned." Chen was watching her with open curiosity. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Somewhere else," Claire replied, "a long time ago." It was clear she wouldn't elaborate. Hayes recognized the type of evasion that came with classified backgrounds. He didn't push. Reeves stood slightly apart from the group, his jaw tight. Finally, he approached Claire and held out his hand. "You saved us," he said. "I was wrong about you, about everything." Claire looked at his extended hand for a moment, then shook it. "You were protecting your team. That's not wrong. Still, I owe you." "No debt," she said. "We all got out. That's enough." Hayes watched the exchange and felt something shift in the team's dynamic. The doubt was gone. The resentment had transformed into something else. Respect, but also curiosity. Claire Donovan was no longer the outsider they'd resented. She was the soldier who'd done the impossible when it mattered most. "We've got a long walk ahead," Hayes said. "Let's move." The team fell into formation. This time, no one questioned Claire's place among them. As they walked through the snow, Webb fell into step beside her. "That rifle," he said. "How did you compensate for the bent barrel without test firing?" Claire was quiet for a moment. "I listened to it." "Listened? Every weapon tells you what it needs. You just have to pay attention." It wasn't a complete answer, but Webb seemed satisfied. Or maybe he recognized, like Hayes had, that some knowledge came from places people weren't ready to discuss. They walked through the night. The snow eventually stopped. Dawn came cold and clear. Behind them, the ridge where Claire had held off an entire enemy force faded into the distance. Ahead, the journey home stretched long and uncertain. But they were moving together now, a team that had learned the hardest lesson of war, that people will surprise you if you give them the chance. They reached friendly lines 36 hours later, exhausted but alive. Medical personnel swarmed them immediately. Webb's leg wound needed serious attention. Chen was treated for shock and exposure. The rest of them were checked over, given hot food, and told to rest. Hayes filed his after-action report in a secure room, with an intelligence officer taking detailed notes. When he reached the part about Claire's performance, the officer stopped him. "Approximately how many enemy soldiers did she engage?" "Based on radio intercepts we picked up later, she tied down at least 40 hostiles for over 30 minutes. Confirmed 3 kills, possibly more." "With a damaged rifle and no optical sights?" "Correct." The officer made a note. "Donovan's file is classified above my clearance. I suspect this mission was an assessment." Hayes had suspected the same thing. "She passed." "More than passed, Lieutenant. You might not see her again. People with her skill set get pulled into specialized work." The officer was right. 2 days later, Claire received transfer orders. She was leaving the unit. Hayes found her packing her gear in the barracks. The rest of the team was there too, saying their goodbyes. Even Reeves, who'd been her harshest critic, seemed genuinely sorry to see her go. "Where are you headed?" Moreno asked. "Can't say," Claire replied, "but thank you, all of you, for trusting me when it counted." "You earned it," Webb said. He was on crutches, but had insisted on being there. "I've been shooting my entire career, and I've never seen anyone do what you did on that ridge." Claire smiled slightly. "You would have done the same." "Maybe, but I'll never know because my leg gave out. You were the one who showed up." She finished packing and shouldered her bag. Hayes walked her out to the transport that would take her to her next assignment. "For what it's worth," he said, "you saved my team. I won't forget that." "Just doing my job, Lieutenant." "No, you did something most people couldn't. You took a broken tool and made it work through pure skill. That's not training, that's instinct." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "My instructor used to say that perfect conditions make anyone look good. It's the broken things that reveal who you really are." Smart instructor, he was. I wish I could thank him. Maybe he knows anyway. She smiled. Maybe. The transport driver called that they needed to leave. Claire climbed into the vehicle. Through the window, she raised her hand in a brief wave. Hayes watched the transport disappear down the road. He thought about the moment he'd handed her that broken rifle, about the doubt he'd felt, the gamble he'd taken, about how close they'd all come to dying in that tunnel. Moreno appeared beside him. "Think we'll see her again?" "Probably not," Hayes said. "People like her get used for things we'll never hear about." "Shame. She would have been good for the team." She was good for the team, even if only for a few days. They stood in the cold morning air, watching the empty road. Somewhere in a tunnel system now abandoned, spent shell casings lay in the snow. Evidence of the moment when a young woman with a broken rifle had saved 11 lives by doing what everyone thought was impossible. The snow would eventually cover those casings. The wind would erase the footprints. The war would move on to other battles. But the people who'd been there would remember. They'd remember the girl no one believed in. They'd remember the commander who'd bet everything on an instinct. They'd remember the moment when trust, given despite doubt, had been repaid with something rare and precious, competence delivered under impossible circumstances. Hayes turned and walked back toward the barracks. His team was waiting. They had a debrief to complete, injuries to heal from, and eventually new missions to prepare for. But first, they'd rest. They'd earned it. And sometimes, in quiet moments, they'd think about that ridge, about the sound of a rifle that shouldn't work, working anyway, about a young woman who'd asked for no recognition, no glory, who'd simply done her job when everything depended on it. In a war full of heroes and cowards, saints and villains, Claire Donovan had been something different. She'd been the person who showed up, and sometimes that was the only thing that mattered.